No one believed the missing kids could still be found until a retired canine refused to stop barking. His nose led them to the darkest secret hidden in plain sight. The sun hung low over Briar Hollow Elementary, casting long shadows across the playground as laughter filled the air. It was Safety Awareness Week, and parents had gathered with their children for a demonstration from local police and fire crews. Tents lined the schoolyard, balloons bobbed on strings, and kids sipped juice boxes while officers shook hands and posed for pictures. Among them sat Odin, a grizzled German shepherd with graying fur and a stiff gait, his tongue lolling out as he rested beside Deputy Lila Torres. He wore his old canine vest, more for show than function, a symbol of service and honor. To most watching, he looked calm, maybe even tired, but inside, something was building. Lila gave a short talk about canine duties, about how Odin used to sniff out narcotics and track missing persons. She smiled when the children asked if he could still do tricks. "He's retired now," she told them, ruffling his ears, "but he's still got a nose that doesn't quit." The crowd laughed politely. Odin didn't move, not until something changed. It happened in an instant. A shift in the wind, a scent drifting from across the yard, something faint but sharp, like rot hidden beneath sweet grass. Odin stood so fast it startled the kids closest to him. Lila turned, surprised, but before she could grab his lead, he bolted, a blur of fur and muscle charging past the booths, past the bubble machine, past startled parents holding their phones mid-video. He didn't bark. Not yet. He ran with his nose low and his eyes focused, straight to the far edge of the playground. The old slide stood crooked at the back corner, rust peeling from its sides, the metal hot from the sun. It hadn't been used in years, too dangerous, fenced off, but never removed. Odin tore through the broken chain like it wasn't even there, and skidded to a stop at the base of the slide. Then he started barking. Loud, sharp, urgent barks that shattered the cheerful hum of the event. Every head turned. Teachers ran toward him. Someone called his name. Lila was already sprinting. Odin clawed at the dirt beneath the slide, barking so hard his body shook. Dust flew in all directions. Children backed away, wide-eyed. Parents shouted, but Odin didn't care. His paws hit something hard, something buried. He kept digging. The ground beneath him loosened. His nails cracked. Blood appeared along his pads, bright against the brown. Still he dug. Still he barked. By the time Lila reached him, a small hole had formed, no bigger than a lunchbox. Odin's muzzle was bleeding, his chest heaving. She grabbed his vest, tried to pull him back, but he growled. Not at her, not with malice, but with warning. "Don't stop me." Not yet. And then he found it. A scrap of fabric, half rotten and faded pink. A shoelace. A child's shoe. Torn, dirty, and impossibly small. Lila froze. The crowd went quiet. Someone gasped. A teacher knelt beside her and whispered, It looks like the one from the news. That missing girl. Harper." Odin lay down, paws muddy and raw, his chest still rising and falling in shallow pants. But he didn't take his eyes off the hole. Not for a second. As if to say, this is just the beginning, keep digging. The sirens came fast, their wails echoing across the playground as officers pulled up and jumped from their cruisers. Parents stepped back, clutching their children close, while teachers tried to keep order. Lila stood near the old slide, one hand on Odin's vest, her heart pounding in her ears. He hadn't moved. His paws were caked with blood and dirt, his muzzle raw, but his eyes stayed locked on the hole he'd dug. He gave a low growl, barely a whisper, but it stopped the nearest officer in his tracks. "What's going on?" Officer Grady asked, glancing from Lila to the crowd. What is this?" Lila didn't answer right away. She was staring at the ground, at the tiny scrap of fabric half covered by dirt. The air was shifting now, the breeze carrying something darker, heavier. A teacher, Mrs. Hanley, crept forward and crouched beside the slide. She didn't speak, just inhaled slowly, and then gagged. "I smell it," she said, her voice thin. "Something's dead." Odin whined. Not from pain, not from fear, but from urgency. He scratched again at the earth, weaker now, his energy draining. Lila stepped aside and let him go. Officers gathered, some with gloves on, some with radios pressed to their mouths. Someone called for the forensics team. Another started pushing the crowd back. The digging was slow at first, cautious. A few scoops of dirt, then a sudden pause. One of the younger officers, barely out of academy, stood up fast and took 3 steps back. "Oh God," he muttered. "Oh no." Lila stepped forward, heart sinking. The hole had widened now, maybe 2 feet across, just enough to see what Odin had found. A child's sneaker, pink and gray, still tied in a double knot. Torn near the toe, caked in mud and something darker. It lay on its side, the laces stiff, the tongue curled back like a scream frozen in time. The smell was thick now. It wrapped around them, sour and wrong. The kind of scent that sticks in your clothes and your memory. Odin sat back slowly, his breath rasping. He had done his part. He had found it. Agent Monroe arrived from the regional FBI office, her badge swinging as she ducked under the tape. She took one look at the hole, then at Odin, then at Lila. "You say he's retired?" "He wasn't ready to stop," Lila replied quietly. The agent nodded. "Clearly not." A forensic tech knelt beside the hole, using a brush to clear away the dirt. More cloth appeared. A child's shirt, faded blue with a unicorn patch sewn near the collar. Someone behind them whispered Harper Bell's name. A reporter from the local station had arrived and was already raising her camera before being waved off by police. The digging continued, under harsh floodlights brought in from the cruisers. Odin lay down on the grass nearby, his head resting on his paws, eyes still open, watching, waiting. Lila knelt beside him and whispered, "You were right. You were right all along." And Odin, battered and bone-weary, gave the smallest thump of his tail, a soft beat against the earth like a signal. This isn't over. Not yet. By nightfall, the playground no longer looked like a place for laughter. The slide, once ignored and rusting in the corner, was now surrounded by yellow tape and floodlights. The swing sets stood still, empty, as crime scene investigators moved carefully through the grass, marking every inch of ground with small, numbered flags. The scent of damp earth and something far worse hung in the air, making even the seasoned officers keep their distance. Odin had been taken to the back of Lila's cruiser to rest. A medic checked his paws, wrapped them gently, and whispered something kind as he ran fingers through the old dog's fur. Odin didn't react much, just lay with his head on his front legs, his amber eyes tracking every person that moved near the slide. Inside the evidence tent, the shoe lay sealed in a clear bag on a metal table. Faded pink, size 11 toddler, still tied tight. Deputy Torres stood beside Agent Monroe as the team pulled up records, cross-referencing missing children reports from nearby counties. It didn't take long. The patch on the shoe, the tiny unicorn head stitched into the side, matched a photo in a file that had been gathering dust for almost a year. Harper Bell, 6 years old, missing from a rest stop off Route 74 during a family road trip. One moment she was in the back seat with her coloring book, the next she was gone, vanished. The search had been long, frantic, but fruitless. No signs, no witnesses, no suspects. Over time, people assumed the worst, that she'd been taken far away, out of state, maybe even out of the country. The flyers disappeared. The news stopped covering it. Her parents had moved away, too broken to stay in the same house. The case went cold, but she hadn't been taken far. She hadn't vanished into thin air. She'd been here, right under everyone's noses, at a school with hundreds of children, a school with security cameras, teachers, fences, a school that had sent out newsletters about safety, posted photos of spirit days, celebrated reading week, while Harper Bell's shoe was buried beneath a rusted slide. Lila stepped outside the tent and looked toward the dark line of trees behind the schoolyard. Odin lifted his head as she approached. She sat beside him on the concrete and ran her fingers through his coarse fur. The hum of police radios filled the silence. Voices murmured. A newscaster whispered into her mic as a cameraman adjusted his light. "They gave up on her," Lila said softly. "But you didn't." Odin blinked slowly, tail giving the faintest twitch. He looked tired but alert, like a soldier still on duty, even when the battle seemed over. Agent Monroe joined them, crouching beside the cruiser. "We're contacting the family now. They're in Indiana. Moved there about 7 months ago." Lila nodded. "They'll want answers." "They deserve them," Monroe said, then looked toward the playground. "This feels too clean, too buried. Someone hid her. Someone local." The word local hung in the air like smoke. This wasn't just a tragic accident. Someone had put that shoe in the ground. Someone had hidden it beneath a slide children played on every day. Someone had known and stayed quiet. And Odin, the old dog with scars on his legs and memories behind his eyes, had finally barked loud enough to make them all listen. Before Odin was the dog who stopped a schoolyard cold with a single bark. He was the one everyone trusted to find what others couldn't. Drugs, weapons, missing kids. He had the kind of nose that made search teams breathe easier, just knowing he was on site. Officers used to joke that he could smell guilt, that if you'd ever done something wrong, he'd find it buried deep in your jacket, your pocket, your past. He didn't bark without reason, didn't lunge without cause. He worked like a machine, silent and focused, never breaking stride. Back then, his handler was Officer Ben Carter, the kind of cop who didn't speak much, but never let go of the leash. He and Odin had trained together for years, had spent so many nights sleeping in the back of a van during surveillance runs, so many early mornings tracking fugitives through fields and broken city streets. They trusted each other more than words ever could. And then, just like that, it ended. It was supposed to be routine. A drug raid on an abandoned farmhouse near the county line. Odin led the charge, fast and sure, his ears forward, his body tense. They breached the door at dawn. Inside, shadows moved. Guns were drawn. One shot rang out, then another. Odin lunged, teeth bared, but the bullet hit Ben first. The dog didn't stop. He kept fighting even after the suspect fled. Officers found Odin half-conscious, his side torn open, lying beside Ben's body. He didn't leave his partner until they carried him out. The department gave him a medal, called him a hero. But Odin didn't care. His partner was gone. The kennel where he used to sleep became too quiet. The leash stayed on its hook. And no one wanted to be the one to tell a war dog he was done. That's when Lila Torres stepped in. She'd been new then, not long out of academy, just trying to prove herself. She'd seen Odin at the memorial, lying still beneath the podium, eyes empty. When she asked what would happen to him, someone shrugged. He's being retired, he won't work again. But something in her didn't believe that. She filled out the paperwork, brought him home, gave him a soft bed in her apartment and a quiet place on the porch. Everyone told her it was a sweet thing to do, a kind gesture to let an old dog rest. But rest was the one thing Odin refused to do. He watched everything, the hallway, the yard, the mailman's steps. He sat beside the window every night, ears twitching, eyes tracking headlights. He didn't bark often, but when he did, it wasn't at squirrels or kids on bikes. It was when something didn't feel right. And sometimes, Lila would find him standing in the middle of the living room at 3 a.m., staring at the front door like he was waiting for someone who wasn't coming back. Lila tried to give him peace, but Odin didn't want peace. He wanted purpose. Even with the limp in his back leg and the scar along his ribs, he remained alert, ready. And though he didn't wear a badge anymore, he still carried the weight of every mission, every scent trail, every partner lost. She never expected him to work again. But the day he lunged toward the rusted slide, the day his bark cut through a schoolyard and shook a whole town awake, Lila finally understood. He'd never stopped being a canine. He'd just been waiting for his next call. The old metal slide had always been an eyesore. Faded red, rust crawling up its sides like ivy, the steps bent from years of little feet climbing them. It had been taped off for ages, a thin plastic barrier looped around its base, more as a formality than real protection. The school board had marked it for removal nearly 3 years ago, citing safety concerns, but the budget never stretched far enough. New turf for the soccer field got approved. A digital bell system for the classrooms passed with ease, but no one made time for the slide. It just sat there, a forgotten relic in a corner of the playground where no one looked too closely. No one except Odin. After the discovery of the shoe, the area was shut down completely. Floodlights turned night into day, and crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze like broken flags. Odin lay beside Lila's cruiser, bandaged and tired but still alert, his ears twitching every time a shovel struck the dirt. Forensics teams moved carefully around the base of the slide. They worked with gloves and steady hands, brushing away layers of compacted earth, whispering to each other in low tones. Agent Monroe stood nearby, her arms crossed, jaw tight. She didn't blink much. She watched everything. Lila stayed close, her gaze fixed on the hole widening inch by inch beneath the slide. She could feel something wrong in her chest, a deep, coiling dread she couldn't name. Odin hadn't barked at nothing. He never had. A tech held up a small object, calling softly for a tag. It was a plastic hair clip shaped like a butterfly, the kind sold in dollar stores. It was scratched, dulled by time. Another team member held up what looked like the corner of a pink lunchbox, caved in on one side. The next item stopped everyone cold. A small bone, human. No question. The mood shifted instantly. What had started as a grim but contained investigation began to stretch outward like ripples in a pond. The digging intensified. A grid was drawn out. Every inch of soil was sifted, every scrap of evidence collected. More items emerged. Tiny shoes, unmatched. A dirty stuffed animal with one button eye. Pieces of clothing rolled tightly and tied with string. A ribbon, still knotted into a neat little bow. The kinds of things packed lovingly by parents. The kinds of things never meant to be found this way. The agents stopped talking. Some of them just knelt there, hands shaking, staring at what they were pulling from the ground. One man stood up and walked away quickly, hand pressed over his mouth. Monroe didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Everyone understood now. This wasn't one child. This wasn't one mistake or one awful moment. Lila leaned against the cruiser and looked down at Odin. His eyes met hers, calm but heavy. Like he knew all along. Like he'd been waiting for someone to finally dig where he'd been pointing for years. She crouched beside him, brushed a hand along his back, and whispered, "You didn't just find her. You found them." And Odin, as if he understood the weight of what he'd uncovered, closed his eyes for the first time that day. Not to sleep, just to rest, because the barking was over now. The silence had done its damage, and the truth was finally coming to the surface. By morning, the news had spread beyond Briar Hollow. Local stations ran the story on repeat, using shaky footage taken from someone's phone. The moment Odin started barking at the old slide, the sirens, the floodlights, the line of evidence bags being loaded into the back of a van. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "Retired K9 uncovers human remains at elementary school." But it was more than that, much more. The phone at the sheriff's department rang nonstop. Not reporters this time, but parents, mothers and fathers who had waited years for answers. Some calls came from 2 towns over, some from other states. They asked the same question, over and over. Was there a pink butterfly clip? A red sneaker? A blue jacket with cartoon cars? Agent Monroe stood in the temporary command tent, a map of the region pinned to the wall behind her. Red circles marked known disappearances. A yellow pin now sat firmly at the center. Briar Hollow Elementary. 10 cases. Cold for years. Most had been written off as abductions during travel, gas stations, shopping centers, rest stops. Children vanishing without a trace. No connections, no suspects. But Monroe saw something the others hadn't. She noticed the dates, the timing. Every disappearance happened during the summer months or holiday breaks. Each child had some connection, however distant, to this region. Some had grandparents here. Others had once attended the same school before moving away. One girl, Harper Bell, had attended a summer art camp hosted in Briar Hollow just a month before she disappeared. Another boy had an aunt who worked as a janitor at the school for 2 years. Lila stood beside Monroe as she sifted through the files. Her jaw clenched tight. The same faces, the same smiles, stared up at her from faded flyers. Some kids had been missing for so long, their photos had been digitally aged. But now, with every new item pulled from beneath that playground, another file was pulled from the archives. What once looked like scattered tragedies now began to take shape. A pattern, a target zone, a place of quiet horror hidden in plain sight. Odin remained nearby, resting on a blanket someone had laid out beside the cruiser. His paws were bandaged, and a bowl of water sat untouched beside him. Every so often he would lift his head and scan the field, as if checking to see if they were still digging, still listening. Families started arriving in person. They stood behind the police tape, clutching old photos, sometimes sobbing, sometimes just silent. Lila watched as one woman pressed her hands together and whispered her son's name like a prayer. Another father showed a detective a drawing his daughter had made the week before she vanished. A third knelt on the sidewalk and cried into the grass. No one had expected it to be Briar Hollow. It was a quiet town, a safe place, a school with colorful murals and friendly teachers, and a playground that used to echo with laughter. But now, they knew. It had been the hunting ground all along, and no one had seen it, except the dog who never stopped watching. Monroe closed one folder and opened another. Her voice was low but steady. Reopen all 10 cases, every one. I want background checks on every adult who's ever worked here, volunteered here, cleaned here. Start with the camp records. If this was their base, then there's more. Lila looked down at Odin, who had finally drifted into sleep. His body twitched slightly, like he was chasing something in a dream. Maybe he was. Maybe he always had been. And now, finally, they were chasing it too. The morning air was heavy with dew as Lila walked the school grounds, Odin limping quietly at her side. He was slower now, his muscles stiff, his bandaged paws brushing over the damp grass. But he moved with purpose, his head low, his nose working hard, as if he was following something only he could sense. The school was quiet, cleared of children and staff, but the tension in the air hadn't left. It clung to the walls and settled in the soil, like the truth had soaked into the very foundation. Odin stopped near the fence line, where overgrown weeds crept along the edge of the property. He stared at a small building, half hidden behind a row of storage bins. It was a maintenance shed, forgotten and sagging, with rusted hinges and a lock that had been broken long ago. Lila followed his gaze, her hand resting on the grip of her holstered sidearm. The shed wasn't on the school's updated blueprints. She'd walked this field dozens of times and never noticed it. But Odin had. He sniffed at the door, then barked once, short and sharp. Lila didn't hesitate. She pulled open the door and stepped into the stale darkness, flashlight beam cutting through the dust. The smell hit her first. Not decay, but neglect. Mold, old sweat, rust, and something sickly sweet. The kind of scent that didn't belong in a place near children. Her beam swept across shelves lined with tools, broken chairs, stacks of old science fair boards. But in the back corner, covered by a blue tarp, she saw something else. Children's clothes. Not folded or stored, piled. Shirts, dresses, small shoes. a stained hoodie, with a superhero patch on the sleeve. She pulled the tarp further, heart racing. Underneath were coils of zip ties, a half-empty pack of juice boxes, candy wrappers, a dented flashlight. Everything looked like it had been stashed in a rush. Panic, not order. She backed out slowly, calling it in. Within minutes, agents arrived. The shed was sealed off. Evidence teams flooded the space, photographing every inch, collecting every thread. Agent Monroe didn't speak when she stepped inside. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. Back at the station, Lila pulled security footage from the past year. Most of the cameras focused on entrances and hallways, not the playground or outbuildings. But there were a few blind spots. The tech team patched together grainy clips from weeks and months ago. And then they saw him. Vince Darrow. Tall, lean, a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. Always alone. Always late at night. Sometimes near the shed. Sometimes just standing under the old slide, motionless, as if listening to something beneath the ground. His personnel file painted a simple picture. Hired 8 years ago as a custodian. No complaints. No red flags. Smiled at everyone. Quiet. Reliable. 2 years ago, he began volunteering for the summer camp program. Arts and crafts with the little ones. Field days. Campfire nights. All perfectly normal until now. The day after Odin's discovery, Vince vanished. Didn't clock in. Didn't call. His phone rang but never connected. Officers went to his apartment. Empty. No note. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Odin stood in the doorway of the command tent. As Monroe addressed the team, "We need to find him," she said. "He's the link. This wasn't random. This was planned. And he's been here the whole time." Outside, the school felt colder. The slide was gone now, removed piece by piece. But the shadows it cast still lingered. And somewhere out there, the man who had hidden among them, who had smiled at their children and cleaned their classrooms, was running. But Odin had his scent now, and Odin never forgot. The trail started at the edge of the school's property, where the playground gave way to the trees. Hollow Creek wasn't much on a map, just a thin line of woods winding down a shallow ravine, the kind of place kids dared each other to explore, but rarely went too far. Thick underbrush covered most of the path, and after a heavy rain the night before, the soil was soft and slick beneath their boots. Odin stood at the tree line, his nose low, tail stiff. Waiting, Lila gave a small nod, and he moved forward, slow and steady, his body tight with focus. He didn't bark, he didn't glance back. He just followed the scent, weaving through brambles, hopping fallen logs, pressing deeper into the shadows. Behind him, Lila and 2 agents moved carefully, their radios off, steps light, eyes scanning every corner of the woods. The creek snaked through the forest like an old scar, barely more than a trickle of water now, but the path beside it was just wide enough to keep moving. Odin paused often, sniffing at tree trunks, brush piles, and old boot tracks half swallowed by the mud. Every time he seemed to lose the scent, he circled, adjusted, and found it again. Lila didn't question him. She never did. Odin didn't need words. He had instinct, and that had always been louder than any command. As the hours passed, the trees thickened, the sun dipped lower, and the air grew colder. Birds stopped calling. The only sound was the soft crush of boots and Odin's breath, low and steady. Then, without warning, he stopped. Lila saw it too. Tucked behind a curtain of vines was an old hunting cabin, half collapsed and leaning to one side. The windows were blacked out, and the porch sagged like it was tired of holding secrets. Odin didn't hesitate. He climbed the steps and pawed at the door once, then sat down, eyes locked forward. The agents raised their weapons. Lila reached for the handle, turned it slowly, and pushed the door open. The smell hit them first. Not death, but mold, mildew, and something sour like old sweat soaked into the floorboards. They stepped inside with flashlights raised, sweeping the small room. A cot in the corner. A wooden chair beside a folding table. Empty cans of food. A lantern. And then, beneath the table, a crate. Inside the crate was a journal, bound in cracked leather, the pages warped with moisture but still legible. There were names, dozens of them. First names, initials, some with birthdays. Some had red ink slashes through them. Taped to several pages were Polaroid photos. Children. Some smiling, some not. Some Lila recognized from the cold case files. On another table sat a map of the county, marked with pins and circles, and a list of phone numbers next to fake names. They weren't just looking at one man's secret. They were staring at a network, a system. Organized, practiced, and hidden behind years of silence. Lila looked down at Odin, who sat quietly near the door, ears up, eyes alert. She knelt and placed a hand on his neck. "You did it," she whispered. "You found the heart of it." Odin didn't move. He didn't need to. His job wasn't done yet. Not until the last child was found. Not until the last shadow had a name. The cabin creaked as agents moved through it, careful not to disturb anything more than they had to. Every corner was photographed, every fingerprint dusted. But Odin stayed by the far wall, his nose pressed low, tail flicking. He kept circling the same spot, an uneven patch of floor where the wooden planks didn't quite match the rest. Lila knelt beside him and tapped gently on the boards. "Hollow," she called over the team. Within minutes, the floorboards were pried up, revealing a square frame of dirt and an old metal handle set into the ground. It was rusted, covered in years of grime, but it moved when pulled. The trapdoor groaned open, releasing a gust of air that smelled of wet earth and something older, something stale and forgotten. A narrow tunnel dropped below, carved from stone and dirt, just big enough for a person to crawl through. Agent Monroe arrived, flashlight in hand. She peered into the dark and then looked at Lila. "Looks like we just found his highway." The tunnel sloped downward, damp walls pressing close, the air thick and quiet. Odin didn't hesitate. Even with his injuries, he stepped into the space, his body low and careful. Lila followed behind him on hands and knees, her light catching old boot prints and pieces of broken plastic. A torn shoelace, a candy wrapper, small things that shouldn't have been here. The tunnel went on for what felt like forever, winding beneath the trees, then curving sharply to the left. It was silent except for their breathing, the scrape of elbows against stone, and the steady pad of Odin's paws ahead. Finally, the space opened into a wider chamber, an old storm drain, long since forgotten by the town. Cracked concrete lined the walls, moss grew along the edges, and in the distance, a faint light filtered through a rusted grate. Odin stopped and looked up. The grate sat at an angle above their heads, just beyond reach. Lila aimed her light through the bars. Grass, dirt, and behind that, metal. She felt her stomach twist. It was the base of the old slide. She climbed up slowly, pressed her hand against the grate, and pushed. It groaned but didn't budge. Years of rain and rust had locked it in place, but from above it would have looked like nothing. Just dirt beneath the slide. No one would have questioned it. Agent Monroe's voice came through the radio behind her. "We traced a path on the town's sewer maps. The drain connects to a runoff system built decades ago. It passes right beneath the schoolyard." Leela sat back on her heels, staring at the grate, at the earth above it. "That's why he barked," she said softly. "He wasn't just barking at a scent, he was pointing to this. This tunnel, this exit." Odin lay down beside her, his breathing steady but tired. He looked up through the bars, then at her, his eyes calm, as if to say, "I told you." Back at the surface, excavation teams marked the tunnel's path with orange flags. The cabin was locked down. The school was shut for further investigation. Every inch would be searched. But it had started with a bark. Not a cry of fear, not a noise for attention. A warning, a message. A dog, long retired, who never stopped listening. And now, finally, the world was listening back. The woods were quiet that night, almost too quiet, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. Shadows stretched long under the full moon, and the only sound was the soft hum of the generator, powering the temporary FBI command post set up near the old cabin. Floodlights were turned off to keep the area dark, and every agent moved with precision, dressed in black. Radios clipped low, weapons drawn but not raised. They waited for one signal, the one that would come from a dog. Odin stood near the edge of the trail, wearing a lightweight rig strapped to his chest. A small camera blinked red beneath his collar, streaming live footage to a monitor inside the van. Lila knelt beside him, one hand on his neck, the other gently adjusting the straps. "Easy, boy," she whispered. "Just like training. Find the scent. Show us the way." Odin didn't flinch. Even in the darkness, his eyes were focused, sharp. He was no longer just a dog. He was a soldier with a mission, and he knew it. Lila gave a quiet nod. "Let's go." Odin moved forward without hesitation, slipping into the tunnel beneath the cabin like a shadow disappearing into the earth. The agents followed, crouched low, weapons ready. The passage was narrow and silent, every sound, every breath, every step, echoing off the cold walls. On the monitor in the van, the feed showed the dog's view, darkness ahead, the blur of stone and dirt, the slow approach to something unknown. Halfway through the tunnel, Odin stopped. His ears twitched. He sniffed the air, then took a sharp turn down a branching corridor none of them had noticed before. Lila followed, heart pounding. She trusted him more than anything. The passage opened into a hidden room, carved deep beneath the forest. The light from Odin's camera swept across it first, and what it showed made the agents behind him stop cold. There were cages, 4 of them, metal bars welded into crude frames. One was open, empty. Another held clothing, tiny shoes, a tattered sweater. In the corner, zip ties and rope. A small desk, with a computer set up, hummed with blinking lights. Cables ran to mounted cameras in the corners. A live feed streamed on the screen. Angles of other rooms, blank walls, empty floors, and one feed with movement. A child, maybe 7, huddled in the corner of one cage, knees drawn to her chest, her face pale and tear-streaked. She looked up as Odin's camera light caught her eyes. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared, frozen. Odin growled low and stepped forward, circling her cage, his tail stiff, his eyes never leaving the shadows beyond. Lila rushed up behind him and saw the girl. Her heart stopped. "Go," she whispered into the radio. "We've got a live one. Move now." The agents surged forward, fanning out, securing the space. One broke the cage lock, while another wrapped the girl in a blanket. She didn't speak, just clung to Odin the moment the door swung open. He pressed against her gently, letting her bury her face into his fur. From the darkness behind them, footsteps echoed. The back exit, someone was running. Monroe shouted, "He's bolting through the drainage line. Go!" 2 agents gave chase. But in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of secrets and steel and silence, Odin didn't move. He stayed right where he was, head bowed beside the girl, keeping her warm, keeping her safe. And for the first time that night, she whispered something no one expected. "You came," she said. And Odin, ever the silent guardian, let out a low huff in return. Not a bark, just a promise. He would never leave her side. Not now, not again. They caught Vince Darrow in a gas station restroom just 3 miles from the state line. His clothes were different, his hair chopped unevenly with dull scissors, and his face half hidden beneath a trucker's hat. But the man behind the counter recognized him from the news. He didn't argue when the agents surrounded him, didn't run or speak. He just raised his hands, eyes hollow, and gave up. Back in Briar Hollow, the town was holding its breath. Word had spread fast about the cabin, the tunnel, the girl found alive, about Odin. Everyone wanted details, but the FBI wasn't sharing much yet. There was still too much to untangle. Monroe led the first round of questioning. Vince said little at first, but after 4 hours alone in an interview room with only the low hum of a recorder and a photograph of the rescued girl staring up from the file, he cracked. He didn't just confess, he poured it out. Names, locations, schedules. He spoke of summer camps and after-school programs used to scout for vulnerable children. He talked about his own past, how he was recruited, how easy it had been to hide in plain sight, how schools trusted people who cleaned quietly, smiled at the staff, and kept to themselves. There were others, teachers, volunteers, staff from 3 different counties. Some were already under watch. Others would be arrested within days. The ring was larger than anyone expected, hidden within the very places meant to protect children. But now, because of a retired dog with a damaged paw and a stubborn streak, it was coming apart. News outlets from all over picked up the story. Headlines called Odin a miracle, a guardian, a hero. Photos of him in his vest, muzzle dusted with dirt, sitting beside Lila were everywhere. On screens, on newspapers, on billboards near city highways. Donations poured into the Canine Fund. Letters from children arrived daily. People sent bones, treats, toys, notes written in crayon. But Odin didn't care. He wasn't in Briar Hollow anymore. He was at the hospital. The little girl they'd found, her name was June, was recovering slowly. She hadn't said much to the doctors or the nurses, but she asked one thing when she arrived. "Where's the dog?" Lila brought Odin that night. He padded gently into the room, ribs still wrapped in gauze, paws still healing. The moment he appeared, June sat up, tears brimming in her eyes. She didn't say a word. She just reached out and buried her fingers in his fur. Since then, Odin hadn't left. He slept beside her bed on a folded blanket, his head resting on her feet. He didn't move when doctors came in, didn't flinch at IVs or checkups. He only opened his eyes when she stirred. When she cried in her sleep, he pressed close. When she sat quietly, staring at nothing, he gave her something solid to hold on to. Lila visited every day. Sometimes Monroe joined her, updates in hand, new evidence, new names. But whenever they tried to talk, June would gently lay a hand on Odin's neck, and he would lift his head like a shield, like a reminder. There was time for justice, but right now, someone had already done his part. He had followed a trail no one else could smell, barked when no one would listen, and kept going even when his legs trembled beneath him. Odin didn't need a medal. He just needed to stay. And June, safe, warm, alive, needed him just the same. The air smelled of cut grass and blooming flowers, as sunlight stretched across the playground at Briar Hollow Elementary. A year had passed since the day Odin barked and refused to stop. Since the day the world found out what had been hidden right beneath their feet. The slide was gone now, torn down, hauled away in rusted pieces, never to be spoken of in whispers again. In its place was something quiet and beautiful. The memorial garden was simple, a soft patch of green with rows of low bushes and wildflowers that bloomed in every color children loved to draw. At the center stood a bronze statue of a German shepherd, ears perked, eyes forward, forever alert. The base was engraved with 6 words that made every visitor pause. Some heroes never stop listening. People came from other towns just to see it. They brought flowers, small notes, even squeaky toys. Some sat on the wooden benches nearby and cried. Others just stood silently, hats in hand. But the children didn't cry. They played. They laughed. They ran past the garden on their way to the swings, their voices full of life, just the way it should have been all along. Lila sat on the grass near the statue, her back resting against the bench. Odin curled beside her in the shade. His face had gone whiter around the muzzle, his steps slower now, but he didn't seem to mind. Retirement had finally taken hold. He no longer chased anything but sunshine and the occasional squirrel in the backyard. But his ears still worked like radar, twitching with every new sound, listening for something more than danger, listening for home. He lay with his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed, tail thumping softly now and then as children passed by. Lila reached down and scratched behind his ear, and he gave a low, contented grunt. A group of kids clustered around the garden, staring at the statue. One pointed at the nameplate and read it aloud. Another asked if the dog was real. A teacher smiled and pointed to Odin. "That's him," she said. "That's the real Odin." They stared in awe, whispering, like meeting a superhero in disguise. Then one girl broke from the group. She wore a yellow dress and blue sneakers, her hair tied back in a loose braid. She walked straight up to Odin, no hesitation, no fear. She knelt beside him and wrapped her arms gently around his neck. "Thank you for finding us," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. Odin lifted his head and looked at her. He didn't bark, didn't wag. He just stared with those deep amber eyes, eyes that had seen too much, lost too much, but had never once looked away. Then he leaned forward and pressed his nose into her shoulder, holding still. Lila blinked against the warmth rising behind her eyes. She didn't speak, she just watched. Because that was the moment that said everything. No cameras, no headlines, no awards. Just a girl, a dog, and the peace that only comes when something broken has finally begun to heal. Thank you for watching this video of a dog's devotion. If you liked this story, show your support with a like, and join us by subscribing for more inspiring stories like this one.